Today's postcard is stamped with Melksham, a little town in the county of Wiltshire. Melksham was first mentioned in the Domesday Book in 1086. Its name could come from the Saxon Meocham, meaning piece of land that produces milk, or perhaps St Michael's Ham or Homestead, the local church's saint, or even a water meadow settlement. Now, hands up those of you who thought I was walking around an oast house. Well, you're wrong. We're not in Kent, we're in Wiltshire. Now, Melksham depended, like many of the towns round here, upon the cloth industry. And this round house was in fact a drying house. And through the middle, there would be like a spindle type thing with lots of spokes coming out, where all the cloth would be hung out to dry. Notice the shape. It's like a coffin. Now you might presume that's because we have here the memorial to the men who gave their lives in the Great War of 1914-1919 and, of course, 1939 to 1945. But in fact, legend has it locally here in Melksham that it's shaped like a coffin, not because of that war memorial, but because victims of the plague used to be buried here, and maybe still are. Half timber there. Now this is typical of a Cotswold Wiltshire cottage. This is Crook Cottage, now being renamed. But you notice the wonderful yellow Cotswold stone here, and also an insurance mark up there. And this would have been around about the 15th century. This would have been built. And we can see now all around this part of Melksham, the church up there, like most towns, growth began around the church. Oh, this is neat. Well, we saw Crook Cottage and some example there of what was left of the half timber, and here we have a timbered house and this whole street, which would have been one of the main streets of Melksham, and of course it led from the church, used to be called Canon's Walk because of its association with the church just at the top of this little road. The great yew in the churchyard of St Michael and all the angels here in Melksham. This tree is reputed to be 400 years old. And of course yews were so often planted in churchyards because they were said to have some protective quality, some protective shield. Because like most Norman churches, they were built over Saxon sites, and many of the Saxon churches were built over pagan sites. And so many of those legends and superstitions that would have started off in pagan times often carried themselves through the Christian church. The old tithe barn, now someone's home, and before that it was the church school, and I'm standing in the playground where lots of kiddies would have skipped and jumped and had a jolly good time. But of course, a tithe barn was where all the local produce was stored that was given to the church by the local people, because tithe is 1/10. So 1/10 of anything that was produced in a village or a town, in this case Melksham, was given to the church and was stored in the tithe barn. And there it is, 16th, 17th century perhaps. Now someone's home with a horseshoe at the door to bring them good luck, and it's the right way up. Well, anyone seen our bell? The church has got one, a rather delicious one, looking at it from here. That one's now gone, and you can see on the date there, AD 1840 in Roman numerals, because this formed part of the old church school, because the tithe barn
wasn't big enough to house all the kiddies of this part of the county. And so a new addition was built, and this is it. And quite frankly, the match is very good, because it's quite difficult to tell the tithe barn from this, or even from the church. So all this Cotswold stone again links in nicely. You know, I've been thinking, this style of roof looks very Dutch, very Flemish. And if Melksham is one of the many, you know, weaving towns, because of the cloth, the round houses where it used to dry out, then I would have thought that perhaps there would have been a lot of, say, Huguenots or Flemish people who'd come over to teach the local people weaving. And I reckon that's why that Wiltshire building there has got that shape with that, you know, very Flemish feel to it. They're called mansard roofs, apparently. And I reckon, see that little tiny window there? I reckon at one time there would have been a lot of weaving going on if you'd have looked through that tiny little porthole.
Fancy a bit of sports and social? Then let's go over to the town's play area, which is centred on and around Melksham House, as was.
The original Melksham House was early 17th century, but it burned to the ground in 1921-22. And it was taken over then by a big company. And to their credit, they actually have built this back to exactly as it was, as it would have been, and that's as it is now. So you could be looking at the original Melksham House. But you know different, don't you? Now, when I was walking along the high street, I said, well, that looks very old, doesn't it? Ancient even. In fact, that is only probably about 20 years old, the whole front of that. Behind it, however, there's a cottage, a building, which is much older. But this is the building of interest, the new hall. Well, obviously not new now, built in 1877. And Rachel Fowler was a benefactress of the town, one of the great Wiltshire Quaker families. And it was her family who actually were involved with the steam plough, traction engines, and very, very important to the inventions of the Industrial Revolution. RF, Rachel Fowler. Well, this is the town football club, and I'm absolutely intrigued by that name. Welcome to the Coniger. You would think that was French, some kind of foreign influence, wouldn't you? But actually what it means is the Coney Green. Coney Green. And that is where the rabbits are. The old locals used to say to their mums, I'm going up to play up the Coniger. And that's it. Where the rabbits are, Coney Green. And this is where they probably bought them. Not far from here is Bath. Everybody knows about Bath. One of the greatest spa towns in the world. Roman times it goes back to. In 1820, Melksham had this idea of setting up its own spa rivalry. And they even built the houses to accommodate all the visitors. They discovered saline springs, you see. Everyone had gone by 1830.